Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Once again, we begin with prayer to acknowledge our dependence on you as Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Bless our Governor General and the citizens of our land. Give us, we pray, perseverance to press on through discouragement and gratitude to acknowledge you in any success. For you have been the people's guide for past 300 years. And with you still on the people's side, we have no doubts or fears. Bless those who have been given the great responsibility of leadership. Give them great concern for all the people who will be affected by their decisions. Give them wisdom to see beyond what is merely in the short term, and great courage to do what is right, even when it's difficult. And with the gift of grace, humility, and compassion, which carries us all when we put our trust and faith in you. Amen. Let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is now in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Monday, March 29, 2021 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed. Minutes for the meeting held on Friday, April 23, 2021 to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay loan contract number 52050C BA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank Global Credit Program for safeguarding the productive sectors and employment.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is the tradition of this chamber to take a moment out of its hectic parliamentary agenda from time to time to remember and to honor the memory of those who once served in either of the Houses of Parliament, or in some cases, persons who because of their contribution globally, regionally, or otherwise to society, are regarded by this Parliament certainly of being worthy of remembrance. Today, sir, I have the distinct honor to read into the record of this Parliament our appreciation for the life of service of the late Joseph, Joe as he was commonly known to many, Edgehill, a former member of Parliament for the constituency of Christchurch West Central, a stalwart of the Barbados Labour Party, the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly, a dedicated husband, father, grandfather, brother to many of the persons who are with us today. And he would have died just over a year ago on the 20th of April. Joe would have celebrated his 75th birthday on May 22nd, which is coming up shortly. He was married to Angela, who is with us here today, and he's left behind 3 children, John, Nancy, and Jomo. I want to take this opportunity to mention also his grandson, Eden, with whom many of us are well aware that he totally adored and loved his grandson. And we are fortunate today, while his grandson is not here, to certainly have his brothers, Ted and Charles, and his sister, Elena, present with us. Let me say at this point that I, on behalf of the country, on behalf of this parliament, I would want to say a special thank you to his family for loaning him to us for the last 14 years to provide sterling representation to the people of Christchurch, West Central, and to this nation. Speaking from a position of, as a child coming up in politics and certainly knowing how it is when you have family members who are in politics, it is not easy, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, while we will today remember the contribution that he has made to the political landscape of this country and certainly to the constituency of Christchurch West Central, it is not to trivialize the fact that this gentleman was a family man, that he was a father, that he was a brother, that he was a son, that he was a grandfather, and certainly a mentor to many as well, because often we don't talk about that side of our politicians. We often are only critical of them in other aspects when it comes to the politics of the day. But the truth is that his family will understand what I'm saying in particular, because they would know the sacrifice that Joe would have made in being able to be on the front line, to be on the firing line, to have to deal with the criticisms and everything throughout his political career in defense of the people of his constituency and certainly his party and his nation. Many have heard the name Joseph Edgell associated with the Edgell's Pharmacy in the heart of Oistins. And let me just say, as a child growing up, I didn't know the man at the time, but as a young child, I used to hear about Edgell's Pharmacy. Everybody knew that this was a pharmacy that you had to go to collect whatever medicinal, and also to get advice from Joe on several matters. And I will just say here, Mr. Speaker, that there are many, from what my father recounts to me, certainly in this party, but across Barbados, several men whom he helped along the way to make sure that they performed as exceptionally as they needed to. And for that, we are grateful, sir. Many, on hearing the name of Joe Edgell and associating him with the pharmacy in Oistins, would also not be aware that prior to coming to the point of being an entrepreneur and owning his own business, he also worked at Knights Limited for some 5 years and then later at Booker's Agency. It seems as though he always had his eyes set on owning his own pharmacy and certainly blazing his own trail as an entrepreneur. And he was able to draw on the early experiences that he would have had in the early years to be able to help him to establish what became known as the Edgell Pharmacy brand. Such was his brand and the impact which he made on the constituency, that it was not surprising that he was chosen to represent the Barbados Labour Party in the 1994 elections. And he held this seat for 14 years straight before retiring from active politics. When Joe announced that he was not returning to active politics in 2008, in one of his last interviews, he told the press that it was actually his family that had discouraged him from participating further. It sounded like the perfect cop-out at the time. Blame the family. And after all, the fact is that he had spent the 14 years away from the household and serving the constituents. But it was also, the family, I think, was also mindful that if he continued along that trajectory, the family business would also suffer. And therefore, it was also a case of his age at the time, and I think he also knew that that time had come to pretty much pass on the baton and still continue to serve in a different way than he had served before, by giving his assistance to those who would come after him. What is commendable about Joe Edgell, though, is that even though he loved being the Member of Parliament for the constituency of Christchurch West Central, he also knew that he had to mentor the younger persons who would follow. And before it was the current representative for the constituency of Christchurch West Central, the other candidate, I believe, at the time, Margot, help me, Calendar, that's right. He would also, at the time, would have lent certain assistance to her as well. The thing is that even though we speak sometimes of retiring from politics, and I've been around long enough to hear many people say that they're retiring from active politics, the truth is that you never really retire. Because once you have that burning desire to serve and to participate in active political life, it is always difficult to ignore what is happening around you. It is always difficult not to want to give advice. It is always difficult not to be the person that people still believe that they can come to for advice or for assistance. And therefore, while he retired from active politics, he was still very much involved in community affairs, and certainly the go-to person to perhaps send persons to the current representative for the assistance that was needed. I'm sure that the current member for Christchurch West Central will speak on this motion later, because I know that he's provided and he's spoken openly about the support and the mentorship which Joe provided to him when he decided to embark on coming into active politics. And I think that is current testimony to the type of individual that he was, because there are a lot of people that retire, but sometimes they don't necessarily give back. They don't necessarily want to mentor the younger politicians and to show them the ways and to show them the ropes. You know, we have a way in Barbadian life where sometimes you sit on the outside and you wait for people to fall, as opposed to being able to hold their hand and let them know exactly what it is that are the pitfalls of being in public life, and certainly being in as a constituency representative. But Joe was not afraid to take younger MPs and persons who are aspiring to public life under his wing and to share some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, and certainly some of the triumphs that he would have experienced during his political career. What has been the takeaway for me, however, from Joe's life was his service to the people of Christchurch West Central. And that is undeniably, I think, what every member that speaks today will recall about him. The reality is that regardless of which side of the political divide you may be on, most people who enter politics actually come with a burning desire to serve. And sir, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. We may not always be able to get everything that we set about to do done, but the one common thread always, regardless of the political party, is that people raised in public life because they want to represent people, they want to advocate for people, they want to be the voice of the people, and they want to transform the lives of the people whom they represent. Now, I recall when I first came into politics and I won in the election, I ended up in opposition. And I had very mixed reactions about winning a seat, but not being part of the government. And I remember at the, when the votes were counted, Prime Minister, she was then mayor to me, but the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast at the time, she asked me why I seemed a little, and I remember my response to her was that I couldn't imagine at the time how, having carried all these people around me to support me, how were we now from opposition going to be able to continue to lead the charge and to be able to transform their lives? And it was at that point that she said to me, well, Santia, you win your seat. You now have the opportunity to learn the ropes, and then when you are in government, to be able to understand and to appreciate better what it is that you have to do. So I say that, sir, to explain that certainly Joe Edgell understood from early as well that service and trying to be able to transform the lives of people is what mattered. But we all go through that phase where we have to pause, depending on what happens, to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to help the people that have put us in the position to represent them? Now, what is it that we want to leave behind when we leave politics? Because I think that's the other takeaway from Joe's life. I think he recognized that he brought a lot of qualities to the table as a pharmacist, as somebody who was a community worker. But he also understood that he wanted to leave a legacy, which indeed he has gone on to do, because he is remembered as being that individual who got on the ground, who worked with the people, who inspired the people, who made sure that the community programs were executed well, who was not afraid to put his foot to the ground and make sure that he was on the front line with his constituents to be able to make the changes that were necessary in the constituency of Christchurch, West Central. The fact is that we all want to make an impact on people's lives. We all want to be able to say that we did things in the constituency. We erected buildings, or we were able to get housing, access to housing for people, that we were able to make life a little bit easier on people. We want to know that we were able to solve the problems, and we want to be able, of course, to be able to say that we were part of a government that was able to transform the lives of people. Well, I can say today that Joe Edgell had the opportunity to do all of those things, and history will record an individual who not only served the people, but made sure that his life of service is a legacy that is left behind, not only for the honorable member who now represents the constituency, but certainly for all younger politicians who will follow thereafter. By the time Joe left politics, after the 14 years in office and serving under the late former Prime Minister Owen Arthur, he described his stint as parliamentary representative as very satisfying. He admitted that most of the things that he had asked of the then government, a lot of them were completed, and he was able to get them for his constituency. And of course, when we think of the years of the Owen Arthur administration, I think it is fair to say that Joe was lucky because he came in with a government that his government was in office, so he was obviously able to get a lot more things done. But he was also part of an administration that not only focused on the economic benefits of getting the economy moving, but also was very key in making sure that a number of the social programs that were necessary across the country to improve the lives of people were also executed. So even if he didn't get everything he wanted, he understood that his contribution was going to be done at the grassroots level. It was going to be done at the community level. He wasn't worried so much about accomplishing every single thing, but he made sure that his presence was still felt in his constituency so that the people understood that he was one of them and he was one that was prepared to walk with them. What is remarkable is that he was an organizer of the Oystins Fish Festival for over 14 years. He was also the founding member and the president of the Pride of Gall Hill Club. And then he went on, perhaps having gained the experience from working with the community, to go on to serve as the executive member of the Barbados Football Association. And for those who know that constituency will know that football is at the heart and the core of much of what people in the community enjoy, similar to my own constituency in St. Michael Southeast. So he understood that while he was a pharmacist and he had his business and everything and he engaged with people in that forum, it was still important for him to be on the ground and in between the people and mixing amongst the people so that he had his pulse on what was happening at every opportunity across the constituency. But he also had a keen interest in music and in entertainment. And for some time, he was the manager of the Southern Stars Calypso Tent. He was also the manager of the Exotic Sound Band and co-manager of JJ Promotions. And many a Calypsonian and many a comedian would tell you that they could go to Joe for the occasional assistance to buy a ticket or the occasional sponsorship to be able to pursue their career endeavors. Many of the things that Joe felt that he hadn't accomplished during his time were things that perhaps all of us in this chamber struggle with from time to time, which is that you want to make sure that you can ensure that your constituents are able to have adequate housing, that we are able as a country to adequately provide for the needs of the people who, because of overcrowding in some cases or because of the financial state that they may be in, may not be able to have access to proper housing. And one of the things that I think he wanted to accomplish, or he felt that he could perhaps have done better at doing, was being able to improve further the housing conditions of his constituents. He also wanted as well, because he was very into, as I said, the sports, he also wanted to make sure that there was even additional facilities provided within the constituency, because again, he recognized that even though you might do all of the things to stabilize the economy, that you still had to make sure that people had somewhere to be able to play and to recreate and to socialize. And you know, the funny thing is that during his tenure, I mean, during that period, 76 to 81 as well, was a period where the Barbados Labour Party was very instrumental across this country in making sure that playing fields that we know today, which had been overgrown with bush, were turned into facilities for ordinary Barbadians to have a space in the community to be able to enjoy outdoor activities. And he wanted to build on that as well. And he continued to make the case for the advancement of these recreational facilities and community centers within the constituency of Christchurch West Central. Prime Minister Motley would have entered politics in 1991 with Joe, and she's often quick to remind us of Joe's commitment to people as being his hallmark in public life. In other words, he wasn't a fair weather politician. He was known as Joe to most of his constituents and maintained the highest standards of decency and decorum, whether he was canvassing, whether he was speaking on a political platform, on the floor of the house, or behind the counter in his pharmacy. He was the consummate community pharmacist during his time. He was a stalwart in Oisin, serving the people of Christchurch, but also serving people beyond the constituency, because people would come from all over the country to get medication from Joe. People would drive from St. Andrew, they would come down from St. Philip, they would come down from St. Lucie to be able to have Joe listen to the concerns that they might have and to be able to get the necessary remedy from the pharmacist, not the doctor, but from the pharmacist. Joe was known as being also a very generous person, and perhaps as I was coming here this morning, my father and I were having a chat about Joe's life, and he said to me that he recalls him being an extremely generous individual. Anybody could go to Joe and were guaranteed that he would help in some way to be able to alleviate their difficulties. And that was the reason why people would come from all across Barbados, not only for some financial assistance, but they would come for him to assist them and to talk through their medical problems with him, because he gave them the comfort not only of solving the problem, but he was also confidential in nature, which I believe was perhaps the most compelling characteristic that he would also have had. And I know he's gone to his grave perhaps with many secrets about many individuals across Barbados. It was not surprising, therefore, that I believe it was just over a year ago that I had the opportunity, when the Gull Hill Park was being renamed in his honor, to say a few words on behalf of Prime Minister Motley, and certainly on behalf of the Barbados Labour Party for him. And it was very touching an event, and perhaps very fitting at the time, because it gave us an opportunity to yet again reflect on his life and the service that he had given to his community and certainly to his country. And on that occasion, people came from all across the community to remember his life, to pay tribute to him, and at the time his wife Angela and others would have been present as well, to be able to let the record show that Joe's life was not in vain. The years of service to the community and to the country were not in vain, and that he will forever be remembered by the people of Christchurch West Central. One of the most difficult things during this period that we are experiencing, the COVID-19 pandemic, is that we cannot come together and celebrate people's lives as we would like. Even in this morning, as we are here, we're still social distancing, we're still wearing the mask. And one of the things about this period, I think, that has been difficult for families, and certainly in the memory of the persons who are passing on, is that if we were in normal times, I am pretty sure that the whole of Christchurch West Central would have been at his funeral. The entire Barbados Labour Party membership would have been there to support his family. But I want the family to understand that even though we were not able to come together because of the restrictions, it doesn't diminish the importance of the man that was Joe to many of us, and that was a mentor and certainly a major supporter of the Barbados Labour Party and certainly of the people of Christchurch West Central. At the appropriate time, arrangements will be made to further honor him, and we've given that commitment to his wife Angela, when things are a little easier for us to be able to socialize and perhaps even to hug and to embrace her and the rest of the family, and certainly her grandson and her son. But this morning's tribute is really dedicated to his life and to the commitment that he made to his country and to his constituency. And I want to really say that this legacy that he has left is one that certainly as a younger member of the party, but also as a young politician, for me, is one that makes us have to reflect on who we are and what we are doing as politicians as well. Because if, as the tributes are read today, regarding the life of Joe Edgell, it doesn't cause whether aspiring politicians or politicians in public life to reflect on whether they are giving their all to their constituents, then I say to you, you need to pause and reflect for a moment on what you have come to public life to do. Because that is the record that has been left by this distinguished gentleman. And therefore, on behalf of the Parliament of Barbados, on behalf certainly of the people of Christchurch West Central, on behalf of the Barbados Labour Party, certainly on behalf of the people of St. Michael's South East, and on my own family's behalf, and in particular my father, who would have been very familiar with Joe during his political life, I want to again express condolences to his family and to just remind you all that the Barbados Labour Party and certainly all of us share with you in getting through this period, because even though a year has passed, we also share the memories of the contribution that Joe would have made to this country and to his community. And therefore we want to ensure that you are well aware and fully supported as you continue to go through these difficult times and to reflect on the life of Joe Edgell. I therefore, at this point, Mr. Speaker, I'll come back later in terms of the resolution, but again, I would want the record to reflect that the life of this gentleman is one that should not be underestimated, and that should certainly continue to be a reflection for all politicians in political life.
He's Central, right? He's East. Honourable member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise as well to pay tribute to a legend in Barbados and in Christchurch in particular. So I did not come up in a political family, and I knew Joe Edgell all of my life from Edgell's Pharmacy. It seemed like every Sunday after church, we ended up at the pharmacy for something. Whether it was sweeties, whether it was a chocolate, for something, sir, we ended up at Edgell's Pharmacy. The Honorable Leader of Government Business, sir, spoke about Joe Edgell's connections to Christchurch West Central. But as a child growing up, and indeed as a young adult, Joe Edgell did not represent Christchurch Central. Joe Edgell was from Oistins. Joe Edgell was Oistins itself. Many of the young people, sir, in our constituency and in the whole South Coast belt knew Joe Edgell. he's that person who would remember each of you. I never saw him anywhere out, and he didn't ask me, Willie. He never ever called me anything but Willie. Willie, how's your mother? How's your father? How's Irma? He'd remember your name. He actively followed and was interested in the development of the young persons who passed in front of him. Joe Edgel knew when I did my 11 plus, and the next time I came in, sir, he gave me a chocolate. And he knew when I did my CXCs. He knew when I did my A levels. He knew when I was called to the bar. And I don't think I'm special in that respect, but that was the mark of the man. Every person who came in through his business was not simply a customer. They were a friend. They were somebody he took a vested interest in. I guess, sir, that is what made him perhaps the standard for what politics and representation should be about. Sir, anecdotally, the leader of government business indicated that he assisted many men throughout Barbados to hold their head up high and be firm as men. But sir, I remember that, I won't say how old he was. I will say that I went into Edgel's pharmacy with a purpose. I was shamed. I was real shamed, sir. And I walked up the aisle slowly. And you're walking up and down, and you're waiting for people to leave. Anybody that might know your parents, you're waiting for them to leave the pharmacy. Sir, you pass what I will tongue-in-cheek call, sir, the portable prophylactics. And Mr. Edgel, from his seat, saw me. I guess I was not the first young man to find himself in that dilemma. And he recognized the symptoms of my distress, sir. And he came, he put his hand on my shoulder, he took me to the counter, and then he said to me, he slid me a box and said, use those. I didn't ask, I didn't have to ask. I guess the look of stark guilt let him know that I was on a frolic of my own. But what he did say to me is never be ashamed to protect yourself. And, sir, that has stood out to me for years. If that is when, sir, Joe and I moved from being customer and pharmacist to what I would call being friends. Because if I could not be comfortable with him thereafter, sir, I can never be comfortable with anybody. But that is the sort of person that he was. You had to feel comfortable with Mr. Edgel. For my whole life, I called him Mr. Edgel. Even when I got into politics and he insisted I call him Joe, I still called him Mr. Edgel because that's how he came up. Joe Edgel was for a lot of Christchurch, not a pharmacist, but a doctor. Joe was never ashamed to make his own suggestion. He didn't hold back at all. You go with a prescription, and he would say to you, look, this is what they prescribe, but to be honest with you, what are your symptoms? And you tell him. He said, this is probably better. And you didn't question Joe. If Joe Edgel said this is better for you, regardless of what the doctor put down on that paper, that was what you were going to take. And he never led me wrong. Sir, the other person who fell into that vein and who followed closely in his footsteps in terms of his educational pursuits, in terms of his professional disposition, in terms of his professional choices, and in terms of his willingness to share, advise, educate, is the Honorable Minister of the Environment, sir. And I wish him from here, through you, sir, as successful a career in politics as his predecessor had. The one thing I was glad for, we often honor the persons who make a difference in our lives after the fact. We often honor them when they are gone. And we have ceremonies for them when it pretty much means nothing to them. I am glad that we had the chance in some small way to recognize the contribution that Mr. Edgel made to his constituency by the renaming of the Gull Hill Park. I was present, sir, and I heard stirring speeches from Air Seeley, who is synonymous with the pride of Gull Hill. He was goalkeeper extraordinaire for years, represented Barbados. And persons spoke about the contribution that Joe made to their lives and the positive influence he had in many young persons' lives who might, but for the influence of Mr. Edgell, have taken a different path. He guided a generation or generations of young people to honest pursuits through sports, to constructive recreational activities, to recognizing the potential you had within you, to maximizing that potential. Pride of God Hill at one time was the foremost football team in Barbados. And we recognize, sir, the member for Christ Church West Central, and we call him fondly Medic. But he effectively did exactly what his predecessor did. He got actively involved in the football, in the teams, providing medical services, providing recuperative services, getting hands-on with the young people that he then chose to represent. And let us not, sir, underestimate the importance of the development of the Pride of God Hill football team. It became known as the Bear Pride of God Hill football team. I think they were sponsored by Bear. And I remember my mother, who loved Joe Edgell. My mother insisted, no Bob in here, Bagon. Because Bagon was from Bear. And that was Edgell. So it is these little things, sir, it's these little things. When we look at what we as MPs can do, you may give somebody a job, you help one person. You may give somebody a voucher, you help one person. If you develop a culture of success and aspiration and excellence, then you don't help one person. You don't even just help the 11 people who play or wear the uniform at any one time on the field, but you help a whole community to pull itself up and believe that it is the best at something. And sir, and that sense of pride, and it is the only sporting team I believe there is in Barbados that actually has the name Pride, the word pride in its name. And it was the pride of God Hill. When God Hill went to the stadium for final, the whole of you could run a cat through God Hill. It wasn't but a person. The whole of God Hill was out to support their team. When God Hill was playing in a domestic competition, it seemed like the whole of God Hill was out as well, supporting their team on the playing fields across the island. That's what it was. It instilled in the people in God Hill, it instilled in that community a sense of pride that we are the best in Barbados at something. It instilled that pride in the members of the team, youngsters, sir, who often came from challenging circumstances, that got a chance to be the best at something. You walk on the street and people knew your name, not for something bad, but for something good. When Arcidi spoke about Joe Edgell and the difference that Joe Edgell made in his life, and Arcidi would tell anybody what Joe Edgell meant to him. You understand, he was not an MP alone. He was not simply a politician. He was a father to a community. He raised a lot of those youngsters from God Hill. And sir, and I feel good to know that this was not a case, sir, of a legacy being left to fall, but this is actually a case, sir, where the seeds were planted on fertile ground and the tree is bearing now fresh fruit. Sir, I have seldom, we come, sir, and we give tributes to people. And we give tributes because the persons were worthy Barbadians. The persons made their mark. You could go on Google and Google whoever the person is and get some facts about them. And we can speak because we acknowledge that they deserve to be spoken about. But sir, this is difficult for me because for as long as I can remember myself, Joe Edgell was a part of my life. And if I didn't call him Mr. Edgell, I'd probably call him Uncle Joe. Because, people say, I called him uncle. He was that person. I would call him uncle. I just want to say to his family, I know that politics is not easy on a family. It is not easy having a family member who has dedicated their life not just to their own family, but to other families and individuals. That you have to split your time with that person, not in half, but almost all of their time goes into their constituency and helping other people who you don't necessarily know, but you have to have faith that the persons they're helping need that help as much as you need them to be home. It was not easy with him being in that pharmacy every day and him going to tend to his constituents at night. But I think in this case, that was a worthy sacrifice that was well made, that made a difference to so many people, that now you think back on it, that time away from his family was time well spent. It doesn't help to ease the reality of it. But as you walk in Christchurch, and as you walk down the main road through Oistins, and you see what is now Joe's Pharmacy, know that for many, passing there was almost like passing the center aisle in a church. You had to acknowledge that it was there, and you had to acknowledge that that was the home of something very good and something meaningful. So on behalf of my family, my mom, Velma Abrams, my father, James Abrams, and my sister, Irma, and on my own behalf, I want to acknowledge the sterling contribution of someone who was an icon. He was in himself an institution, and he was a hero to many young persons who had the chance to meet him and had the chance to be influenced by him. So from my family to yours, and on behalf of the wider Barbados Labour Party and my constituency of Christchurch East, many of whom knew him just as I did, I want to thank you for lending him to us. I want to thank you for understanding that he had, in addition to his own family, he had another calling that was no less important, although it was many times painful to deal with. Medic, only because that's how you're known through Pride of God Hill. I challenge you, through you, sir, I challenge the current representative to be half the man that Joe Edgell was in his constituency. And if he only reaches half, then his political future is indeed secured. Sir, with these few words, I thank you for allowing me to speak.
I'm over Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for recognizing me as well, as both myself and my good friend from St. James also got up. But I think today may be considered a little bit of a Christchurch thing. And first, let me apologize, because I don't think that you could get through a speech like this without calling some people's names. And as you would appreciate, even the presenter would have called names, and the member who spoke before me so eloquently would have called names. It's very difficult to get through a speech like this without calling some names. But I promise there will not be in any pejorative manner at all. Let me first start by saying Joe Edgell, to me, was more than a MP, more than a colleague, which he was, more than a patient, which he was. Joe Edgell, to me, was one of my greatest friends in Parliament of Barbados. One of my greatest friends, if not my greatest friend. Indeed, as I was showing his widow earlier, one of my prized possessions that I have is visiting Joe Edgell's home and taking, his wife, his widow actually, took this picture of Joe and myself together. And whenever I look through my pictures, I look at that picture very, 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 very fondly. Let me first give you a little background. When I entered the House of Parliament in 2003, you know, when you go in for your first day, they have a little name in front of you to say where you would sit down. And I tend to be an early person, and Joe was there. And when I got in, I was on the back bench. Joe was the deputy speaker, so he was in the first chair. The second chair would have been the current member for St. Michael West, so the name was there. Joe Edgell said no, and he switched the names and put my name, and the current member for St. Michael West might even recall this. Joe switched the names to put me to sit next to him, and the current member of St. Michael West would then sit next to me. So I was sandwiched between the two of them. So when the current member for St. Michael West came in, he made it very clear and was a little upset because he said, I have worked too hard and too long to be third in line. And I don't know if you remember this. And I have worked, and he said very clearly, I worked too hard and too long to be third in line. And Joe Edgell said to him, this is a Christchurch thing, and you can't get in between the guys from Christchurch. And that was the end of it, and I sat down there for the whole time that I was sitting in Parliament. And it was a good thing. It was a good thing. And I'll tell you why it was a good thing. Because Joe and the member for St. Michael West, they both mentored a young member of Parliament. And they helped me not only to understand the rules, and because he was the deputy speaker, he obviously knew the rules well and how to engage in Parliament. And he helped me to understand the rules of Parliament, and he also helped me to understand the workings of Parliament and the workings of government. And I am truly indebted to Joe Edgell for the mentorship and the stewardship and the leadership that he provided to me in my early years as a member. And the member on the other side to my right, he also assisted that, but he also assisted more in the intricacies and the nuances of government, and also the importance of religion. And so I had both sides in Parliament. And in a way, I am sad about this current COVID situation, because the younger members having to sit 6 feet apart, you can't really share those conversations and those deep understandings like we used to do in those early days that I was in Parliament. But it was instructive, it was interesting, and it was fun. And I was also very proud when his son Jomo chose the same profession that I am in. And in fact, I think I had some influence in suggesting that is the profession that he went into. I believe he went to the Dominican Republic, where he studied dentistry, and I believe he still lives there today. I believe he still lives in the Dominican Republic today. And Jomo, like Joe, is very tall, 6'4", I think, or something like that. Very imposing. And exceedingly, because he came and he worked with me, observed in the practice from time to time, exceedingly intelligent very much like his father, very much a people person. And Joe Edgell was the epitome of a people's person. I remember when he would have introduced me to his twin Ted, who actually lived in my constituency, and myself and Ted developed a very strong bond and a very strong relationship that continues to this day. And we didn't only share in a parish, but you would recall in 2003, prior to the election, the Sergeant's Village community was in fact part of Christchurch West Central. So we in fact shared a boundary. And Joe Edgell and myself, we walked that constituency in advance of the 2003 campaign. And I remember Joe saying, you gotta go and see the Tues, because there's a big family out there. And you gotta go and see the Prescotts. Come with me. And we would go Saturday after Saturday after Saturday and go around. He would introduce me to family. In fact, he introduced me to the current representative for Christchurch West Central, who also became not only my patient, but my very, very close friend as well. And I only have fond memories and good memories of Joe Edgell. I remember that we put on football competitions at the Sergeant's Village Community Centre and Field. That we have continued that tradition with the current member, and we haven't put on football, but we've certainly put on some cricket competitions in Sergeant's Village. So I know that the people of Sergeant's Village appreciated, respected, honored, and loved Joe Edgell. And you could not meet Joe Edgell and not feel that bond, feel that commitment that he had for his people, feel that respect that they had for him and that he had for them, and that he strove every day to give of his best to the people of that constituency. Not only in Sergeant's Village, but I saw in Gall Hill. I saw in Silver Hill. And we also then ventured to see the late, well, he wasn't late then, Duncan Carter, myself and Joe. We went to Duncan Carter's house, met with him, spoke to the family. This was right after Duncan had demitted office. And we had a very special bond. And he, up to this day, the people of Sergeant's Village and the people of that constituency speak very, very fondly of Joe Edgell. I remember another very interesting story. One day in Parliament, I was discussing with Joe who was going to be running against him. And I told him, I heard my friend Morris King's son. I wouldn't say the name that we used to call him at school, but the member for St. James would know that there very, very well. And I said, man, Joe, this guy, you know, he's very intellectual, arrogant. He can give you a rough time. And Joe very calmly said, William, let me tell you something very simple. I beat the father, and I could easily beat the son. And that was the epitome of Joe Edgell. Very calm, very collected, very precise, and he understood and he knew what he had to do and when he had to do it. So I have, as I said, fond memories. Joe was very much my friend, very much my colleague, very much my patient, very much a person I looked up to, a person I respected, my mentor, and I am deeply remorseful that he has passed. Happy that as the member for Christchurch, he said that we were able to honor him before he passed. And I think this is an important thing. I think too many times we wait till somebody has passed before they can appreciate and honor that a government have bestowed. A simple naming of a community center, naming of a park, a road, these kinds of things. It reminds me of talking about naming of a road. I remember as the member for Christ East was talking about the pharmacy, the late Sir Harold St. John. Many times we were sitting in a three discussing, as Sir Harold looked at Joe and said, Man, Joe, but how you manage? For the amount of drugs that you give away 3 pharmacies to the people of Gall Hill and Silver Hill. And Joe laughed and said, they're not only people of Gall Hill and Silver Hill, they are my people. And that is Joe Edgell. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I am so happy to be able to give this short tribute to a man that was a colossus in Christchurch. I thank you.
Honourable Member St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I too would just wish to make a very brief intervention. Obviously, as I listen to my colleagues, it provokes, sir, memories of a man, and not just a man, but a man who's become a good friend, but provokes memories of a man who has himself become a memory. And I say, sir, that if you could forgive me for being tempted to stray down the anecdotal path as some of my colleagues have done, I listened to the leader of government business when she commended Joe Edgell on his life of service. It is a point that must not be taken lightly. Many people would not be able to comprehend the degree of fear that a 12-year-old boy felt one day when his parents were actually overseas for about 3 or 4 days. The grandmother in whose care, custody, and control that little 12-year-old boy was left took sick. That 12-year-old boy had 2 brothers, one aged 9 and one aged 6. The 9-year-old also took sick. No, I confess, sir, that 12-year-old boy was me. I remember it, sir, almost as though it was yesterday, because my grandfather, though possessed of a car, he had left home early, and wherever he was those days, we had no cell phone. So he was unreachable. So grand sick, and my little brother is equally unwell. And I think it may have been a bout of food poisoning or something like that. Anyhow, I know he has a roasting fever, etc. And as I say, sir, nobody can easily comprehend the amount of fear you feel when there's no immediate adult to go to. And I said to my grandmother, well, Grand, what should I do? And she says, look in the phone book for Edgell's Pharmacy. So I called down to Edgell's Pharmacy and speak to Joe Edgell. So I did, so said, so done. And I said, Mr. Edgell, because at that time he was, as the honorable member for Christchurch, he said, Mr. Edgell to me. And Mr. Edgell, this is Kerry Simmons here. Oh, Drew's boy. Yes, sir. I have a problem. But tell me what it is. And I explained to him the circumstances. He said, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And as he's saying, oh dear, my heart is getting heavier and heavier in my chest, sir. And then he said, you can get to me? I said, well, I could do so, but I ain't got no money nor nothing like that. He said, don't worry about that, come. So I got on my bicycle, and we were living in Gibbons in Christchurch at the time. My father still lives there. So that is probably about 2 miles down the road, and we went down. I rode down to Oystins, went in the pharmacy, and he sat me down right next to there was a little stool next to the cash register. And he said, now go through the things with me again. Let me understand how your brother feeling. What was the symptoms and so on. And as he went through, I explained to him. He said, okay, this is what you're going to do. And he gave me the necessary medication. And for my grandmother, same thing. He said, you're going to be able to manage that going back at the road? I said, yes. And I'm gone. And, sir, that gesture, because I think it really was the first time I had ever interfaced in my life that I could recall with a politician. And he was not yet a member of parliament, but he was a person of stature in the community. I think the member for Christchurch East has put it very well. Joe Edgell, though he represented Christchurch West Central, really was a representative for all of Christchurch. Yeah. Even before he had been the elected representative, he was the person that you go to if you had a problem in the Christchurch community. And growing up in Christchurch, we all came to understand that. But the fact of the matter is, sir, that in that very personal way, this person, when he then went into public life, there was no doubt in my mind that that would have to be the sort of person who you should support, because I remember then, as I remember now, how it was without batting an eyelid. As natural as their following night, come, let me see how I can help you, go along. And not a word ever said thereafter, other than perhaps to inquire how the family. Now, I feel, sir, that that personal and perhaps a lot less salacious anecdote, titillating, not salacious, a lot less titillating than my friend, the member for Christchurch East. That personal reflection, sir, has also helped to shape not only my understanding of Joe Edgell, but my understanding of what representation of people really has to be about. Subsequently, I started to frequent, as in my adolescent years and also in my adult years, that pharmacy on my own volition. And it was also an opportunity to sit down and chat and learn about society. Many people can attest in this chamber, the honorable member for St. Michael East is one of them, that you go by Edgell Pharmacy if you're passing through Oystins, and Joe will tell you, come, let me talk. And you go in the back where he's dispensing, and people will come and they do their business there, and he would pause the conversation, and he'd deal with them, and he would talk to them about their problems and so on. And in every single instance that I could remember, Joe Edgell was the source of information, the source of guidance, the source of support. People would go to him. I think it is very true to say that they would go to him just to ask his opinion about what they should do about a problem that they have. And many times I have sat there in that inner room where he would dispense his medication, and Joe talking, and an hour would pass, an hour and a half would pass, and Joe is just holding forth, but sharing information, sharing knowledge, and sharing his perspective on the parish of Christchurch and of things of a social and economic nature in Christchurch. It could be about, for example, housing. He was a passionate believer in the improvement of the quality of housing and some of the things that the NHC should do and perhaps ought to do still. And I'm sure the Honourable Minister knows well that Joe felt very strongly about housing. The first time that I have ever heard the argument advanced that we have to rethink the way in which we allow people in Barbados to go through what he called the torture. Joe Edgell is the body who first described it to me as the torture of applying for housing units, because of the fact that you can have so many people lost in the system simply because government doesn't have the ability to offer the housing solution to everybody who applies. And we experienced this problem in my constituency at Lancaster only a few weeks ago, where they turn soil, and within a week of that, you invite applications for 200 houses, and the reality is you have in excess of 12,000 applications for 200 housing solutions. That's a reality. And Joe made that point to me early, even before I went into public life myself, that this is a problem that we have to be able to grapple with. And that for successive administrations, is because you've made the point as well, it's not just a party thing, it's a national thing. Because you can find people who have been waiting on an NHC solution for 15, 20, 25 years. And I came to experience that in my own constituency, where I met a lady who had been waiting on an NHC solution for 27 years, Mr. Speaker, sir. So it is a reality. He shined light on that from his own perspective. He shined light, I remember well, and as I said, I really felt privileged to be able to sit down and talk to this man who would make time for young people and share his views and his experiences socially, but also in terms of public policy. When we talk about Pride of God Hill, it is a fact it was near and dear to him, as was Oystins and the development of Oystins and the Oystins Fish Festival and all of the enterprises in Oystins. That Bay Garden project that you see there, sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is as much the heart of Joseph Edgell as it is Bernard St. John or anybody else. He would have worked with those people, sir, night and day in order to make sure that their circumstances were improved. And it was his greatest joy to see people who came out of that as small entrepreneurs growing and developing. Same thing with the football, sir. It was, for Joe, this business of politics was about developing people. As I say, sir, it is a sad thing because you are provoking memories of a man who has become a memory himself. But I think that he's left with us a lasting impression of how the business of public life is best done. And I feel a sense of gratitude that I've been able to live in the time when Joe Edgell was alive. I feel a sense of gratitude that I entered a parliamentary group where there was not only Joe Edgell, but there was also Bernard St. John. In 2001, when I would have gone into the Senate, they would be part of the parliamentary group. In 2003, when the member for Christchurch West and myself entered Parliament together, they were part of the parliamentary group. And it really, well, I think by that time Sir Harold would have left the parliamentary group. But it really was an opportunity, sir, for you to learn and to experience this business from the perspective of people who really gave their all to the development of opportunities for the people that they served. To his widow, Angela, I know that it cannot be easy. I have on not one but two occasions, had to come to understand how hard it is on a wife when you are a husband in politics. So I know that your journey cannot have been the easiest. And I think that we are all indebted to you for that which you have sacrificed in terms of family life and time and all of those other things, because your husband had fulfilled this passion. Equally to Ted and Charles, I know that he relied on you all as towers of support. I know Ted better than I know Charles, but I do know that you all have been towers of support to him. And I want to extend my personal sympathy to you. It is really an expression now, because a lot of time has passed. But I do feel that we, as a society, are much the richer for having Joe Edgell with us. And certainly we, as a parliament, are much the richer for having had him sit as one of the members of the parliament, one of the legislators in this House of Assembly. I am obliged to you, Mrs. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and other distinguished members of the Honorable House of Assembly. A good morning to you all. I shall, in a short way, seek to honor the life and contribution of one of the most handsome, tall, important men in Barbados and in the political arena as well. Joseph Edgell, a grandfather, a friend, a confidant, gave distinguished service for over 15 years. But indeed, I believe that his service to the community and the society surpassed that 14-year stint, because he would have been a man of the people, for the people on the ground. Before that, making sure that he offered service to the people of Barbados. And we would have heard, as a distinguished pharmacist, people came from all over the country to go to Joe's pharmacy in Oistins to be able to receive not only medication, but proper guidance and service. And I think that speaks the volumes of the man. I know that his overall vision, though, was for the empowerment of his constituents, where he never became callous-minded or biased or victimized anyone because of their political persuasion or color or class or anything. He was just that kind of affable guy who would listen and who would seek to get solutions to the challenges that may have been placed before him, or if he had heard of them, to want to follow through. He remained humble, and I think this is most significant, because a lot of people are of the opinion that politicians are rambunctious and they don't hear anybody and they're out of touch. Joseph Edgell remained humble, connected, accessible, and rooted in the principles of service. And I'm sure that many of us are emulating that example that he set, because we know politics is about people, by the people, for the people. And for me, Joseph Edgell exemplified that kind of relationship and offered indeed that kind of service. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, his representation to Christchurch West Central was par excellence, because he was a perfect grassroots man who came from among ordinary people and was for the people, and he exemplified that in every sphere of his life. We all know that politics can be very challenging, and we can get some tall kicks, Mr. Speaker, especially when people, sometimes they don't know anything about us, but they just look and make their own assessment. But Joseph Edgell, a wonderful man, an ordinary man, performed extraordinary feats in Christchurch West Central with the kind of representation he offered to his people. I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, of him ensuring that when that project, I believe it is by a hall, I don't always remember the names of these areas, but when those spots were being sold by the government, he made sure that his people were included in reaching that position of receiving the majority of the spots. And I agree, if spots are being made available in a constituency, I believe that the Member of Parliament, despite whichever persuasion that Member of Parliament is, we are equal in that respect, should be able to get at least 60 to 70% of the House spots. So I know of the morning when he and the late Honourable Professor Owen Arthur were in the courtyard of Parliament, and he became so upset. He did not have all the facts, but he so wanted for his people to receive housing, because I believe that they should have been the first beneficiaries as well, and that matter was settled. It blessed my heart, though, the manner in which he spoke for his people to be given the opportunity to have a piece of the rock right here in Barbados, and indeed in Christchurch West Central. The other thing I've admired about Mr. Edgell is his love for nurturing young people. He played a particularly keen interest in our males that many people shunt aside, because young boys, they're not always as settled as girls, and therefore people just shunt them aside. You're rude, you're disrespectful. But I saw Mr. Edgell nurture the youth, not only of his constituency, because how constituencies are laid out, as we all know, they're borders. So he would have been bordering other people's constituencies, but he did not make any distinction or any difference among them. He made sure that those young men followed what we continue to push, acknowledging that Barbados now has a high percentage of persons living with non-communicable diseases. And so I believe that his vision was similar to that of the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness now, looking at how we can eat differently, making sure that we get the adequate exercise. And so he nurtured those youth whom he would have seen in another 5, 10, 15 years going down the line, that they would have fallen through the cracks. And for me, the image that would have been developed through Mr. Edgill's guidance and nurturing lifted many of those young males in that constituency and their joining ones to a level where they became Barbados football members, to be able to show the pride and the joy that they would have received, and the kind of gravitation toward higher goals as they were intimately involved in the exercise. So his investment was to pass on the good standards of living, discipline, service, care, and of course, healthy living, a healthy bodies that would lead to longevity. And for me, that sealed off most of what the late honorable member would have extended to us. In 1994, I would have been a civil servant, so I remained very quiet and peaceful, adhering to the general orders of the country. But I stayed on the sidelines at meetings, and I listened, and I admired him and the late Duncan Carter, and of course Sir Henry and all the others who were some of the valiant men in the constituency of Christchurch who made sure that they devoted time, energy, service to the people of those constituencies. Joe was also an integral part of it. I heard the honorable member for St. James Central just now speak about the center in Christchurch. I called it the Aberdeen Center. And I remember how he fought tooth and nails at our parliamentary meetings to make it happen, because he too had a special business, had special interest in small business, and how people from living in the environs of that center would have become empowered as well. And hats off to him and all others who would have worked assiduously to make sure that Mr. Edgill's dream for people in his constituency and the adjoining constituencies get a piece of the stake of whatever would have been happening in Barbados. As a pharmacist, I learned of a lot of stories. I lived too far to go up to Oistins to get medication, but indeed I was impressed with everybody who had gone up to Joe's pharmacy in Oistins. They spoke so highly of the service and his capacity to listen as people raised their concerns, and Joe would always provide a remedy to be able to fix whatever that situation would have been. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, as I come to a close, that I really truly admired the personality and the contribution of the late Comrade Joseph Edgill and what he has done to change the whole social and economic landscape of Barbados. And I believe that as we reflect on his outstanding contribution to the growth and development of Barbados, that we will all remember with fondness and also keep in direct contact with his family, who would have suffered as most politicians' families will suffer or have suffered because people try to ill-treat them and do all kinds of strange things. I pray that we will continue to work closely with the family as we let them understand how we have cared and loved and respected him. And it was no small matter when the current honorable member for the constituency was able to open up the park in memory of the late Joseph Edgill. Thank God he was still alive and he was present. I was there, so I know. I so loved him that I followed him all over. And I was so proud to see that that has been named in his memory. But I believe that as time goes by, we will have to, as a people and a country, honor the contribution of the late Joseph Edgill in a different way, so that it goes into the annals of history. This ordinary working class man who has been committed, dedicated, a community worker of, it was par excellence in respect of him. I hope that we will continue to remember, and therefore I want to take this opportunity, sir, to extend to his wonderful wife, Angela, his children, his brothers, and the rest of the offspring, and indeed the people of Christ Church, West Central, our deepest condolences at this time, and pray that we know, and we all know, that his contribution will be etched in the annals of history, but that as time goes forward, we will all pull together, not only as a society now, but as a Labour Party, to start documenting further contributions of the outstanding Barbadians who have been able to make and to change the whole atmosphere and the environs of this small island, and to help to empower people to the extent that today we can all say his labors were not in vain. May his soul rest in peace and rise in glory. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And may I begin this brief tribute by offering courtesies on behalf of the residents and constituents of St. Michael West and myself to the family of the late Joe, his wife and other relatives who are present with us, those not privileged to be with us today. There are those in political organizations who are not perceived to have loomed large in the organization, that is as large as others seem to do, but whose role in contributing to the well-being, the development of those organizations and the service that those organizations render to community and country is invaluable. And I think that that could honestly be said of Joe Edgeo. Perception would not be held that he was one of the brightest stars in the firmament of the Barbados Labour Party, or perhaps even in Barbados politics, because of the measurement or the measure that people usually apply. When one applies the measurement of genuineness and a wholehearted, sacrificial attempt to serve your community and your country, when that measure is applied, then the true value of service is found and realized. And I think that can truly be said with reference to Joe Edgell, and I want to begin by saying that. I didn't have need to call on Joe for any medical assistance in any emergency, as the Honourable Member St. James Central did. Neither was I a beneficiary, as the Honourable Member St. James Central was, and the Honourable Member St. Michael East, my friend. Never a beneficiary of his abundant generosity with respect to the provision of performance-enhancing supplements. But I applaud him for his willingness to come to the aid of those who were in dire need and to be able to adequately meet what was required for their particular circumstance. That is the behavior of a true colleague. And I salute him for coming to the aid of his colleagues and his friends. I sat with him in the first term. My first parliamentary term from 1999, I sat next to Joe Edgell in the Parliament of Barbados. And there's one thing I could say that he gave me during that first term. And notwithstanding the fact that all of us are involved in the practice of politics, notwithstanding the general perception held of politicians out there in the wider society, much of which is misfounded, we would have, if we're to be honest, admit of some measure of truth to the view that politicians are in it for themselves. And even though you come to this parliament with a desire to serve, you may yourself be possessed of that view to some degree, as I was at 1999. I sat with Joe Edgell in the first term. One of the things he gave me was the confidence that not all politicians are in it for themselves, because clearly from how he conducted himself, clearly from the level of quality and quality representation that he gave, and the focus of his speeches when he did speak, there was a clear indication that he was about the people of Christchurch, West Central. But yes, it was true that after the 2003, after the 1999-2003 term, and I walked into Parliament at the start of Parliament, and I saw the nameplates set out there, and I saw next to Joe Edgell, one William Duguid. My nameplate had been removed from its accustomed place and placed a little lower down. And I was a little bit taken, foreshadowing events to come perhaps, but I was taken aback a bit by that, because I was led to believe that in Parliament there's some measure of rank observed. Yeah? There's some measure of seniority observed. And here was this whitish guy who I'd come to learn had some money, and I really did presume that he himself had placed that card in that place. And I challenged it. But of course, not being one of the persons within the party who perhaps was as highly regarded as some others, I had to take my place and give way to the new arrangement. I came soon to learn, though, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch West has unwittingly admitted today, I came soon to learn that in the intention of Joe Edgell, and it was he who had done it, I found, it was the intention of Joe Edgell that we should place this rather greenhorn upstart coming out of Christchurch between us, so that somehow he may benefit from that which we had acquired by dint of experience, and that which we had developed in terms of character building in the context of politics over time. And so we worked on that guy, and he has turned out for much the better, I have to admit, even with respect to spiritual matters. I think he's actually gone on to study theology, and I do not know why he's still sitting in this place. But that being as it may, that was the situation, and we really had some good times. Joe Edgell, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, and myself would talk a lot. Joe spoke more in asides on the back bench than he did from his feet, standing in Parliament. He did, and we talked a lot. And I learned a lot from Joe in terms of politics, the politics of Christchurch, the politics of the Barbados Labour Party, the politics of Barbados. I learned a lot from the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, and mostly about business and money, because that was his focus in the early stages when he sat with us. And I will not tell you one or two of the specific things I learned from the Honourable Member for Christchurch West about money. But hopefully as I go on, I will be able to say one or two things I learned from Joe Edgell about politics and representation and all of that. Joe Edgell paid me a compliment. It's perhaps the biggest compliment I have ever been paid by any colleague parliamentarian, perhaps in my public life. And I have not ever really repeated that in public. I've said it to one or two people, but he paid me a compliment which I would never forget. I don't think it turned out that he was prophetic, at least not yet, but it was a compliment that encouraged me. Because fool not thyself. In politics, one needs a lot of encouragement no matter where one sits. You can sit as a member of the governing party with 29 seats, but you still need encouragement to get up and face the day, encouragement to get up and face the situations, encouragement to get up and be the type of representative, first of all, for the people, that the people have elected you to be. And you need encouragement to stay the course and be focused on the business at hand, which is firstly about representing people's interests, secondly about the development of your party in the interest of helping people. And I will not repeat specifics of that compliment, but I have never forgotten that. Now, Joe Edgell, Mr. Speaker, you may know, was not a frequent speaker, as I said, on his feet in the halls of Parliament. He was certainly not a flamboyant speaker. As a matter of fact, my sense is, and if I'm wrong, the alma member of Christ Church West can correct me, he dreaded having to stand in the Parliament of Barbados and speak, especially on occasions when the debates were carried live via the media at times of budget and stuff like that. He was not the type of person that hankered for that. If he could have gotten away from it, he would have. And I remember distinctly him offering every time the budget debate came around and he had to speak, offering to speak at 9 o'clock in the morning or 9:15 in the morning when perhaps you had not many people listening. And of course, on the basis of the need to observe discipline in the Parliament, Leader of Government Business in the House at the time would say, and Joe Atherley, you have to speak after Joe Edgell, because I can't count on the others to be early. Let there be a lesson learned from that. That perhaps continues still to be a problem. But he was not a frequent speaker. He was not a flamboyant speaker, Mr. Speaker. His was not the language that was flowery. His was not the tongue of a St. James Central MP and others in here who have a clear skill and talent and gift for speaking. But it is not so much about the loudness of the speech, in my view. It is not so much about the length of the speech, nor even is it as much about the language that you use as it is about the heart which speaks and the values that that heart exposes and the interests that it espouses, the causes it supports. And if that is the measure, then Joe Edgell did a marvelous job when speaking on the floor of the Parliament of Barbados, represented the interests of the people of Christ Church, West Central. When I challenged Branford Tate, former member of this House, in 1999, in the general election, one of the themes I repeatedly used, since Mr. Tate had been a representative for about a quarter of a century in the Democratic Labour Party's stronghold and a senior member of the administration over those years, one of the themes I repeatedly used, Mr. Speaker, was point me to the monuments that stand in record to those long years of service in this constituency. What are those monuments, those memorials that you have established? In my inexperience, Mr. Speaker, I was looking for physical structures. I was looking for those infrastructural development, those capital projects in St. Michael West that represented a reflection that the then Mr. Tate representative had given good service to the people of St. Michael West. I was challenging on that basis, and there was hardly any to which he could point. And I remember him saying then, and I thought it was an admission of failure, the monuments and memorials are in the hearts of the people, in my own heart. I dismissed that as a cop-out excuse. But I've come to learn since then that it is good that you can have these capital development projects, these infrastructural projects. But in fact, there's a lot more that you can do for people which not necessarily reflect itself in visible, tangible infrastructural objects and the like. But you can serve people valiantly from the heart and do things that change the lot and the plight of people in significant and meaningful ways. And I think that that is the way that Joe Edgell sought to serve. Not that he didn't seek to get anything done on the ground in terms of facilities and capital projects, just like anybody else. But the point I'm underscoring here is that perhaps there is an alternative measure, or there's a greater value to be attached to a measure which tries to weigh what you've done in the interest of people by the change, the degree of change that you've made in the experience, in the existence of people. And Joe's legacy perhaps is not best to be found in any capital or physical or infrastructural projects, not in the tangibles of community monuments, infrastructure-wise, but perhaps in his efforts to build a sense of community, and that has already been testified of here today, to build a sense of community in a constituency that had developed in some of its more prominent centers a reputation which was more negative than it was positive. You got to build a community such that Gall Hill and Silver Hill and these kind of places do not attract a sustained reputation of being a place where people want to escape from, do not want to visit, do not want to live. No good thing could come out of Nazareth. And I think the effort to change community, to build a sense of positive image around the community is extremely important. Already referred to, and I got to learn of this in talking to Joe Edgell himself and hearing from other people, is unpublicized and sacrificial kindnesses which made a material difference in the lives of people, perhaps to the detriment of self and perhaps to the detriment of family. And there are those who sit here, I am sure, who know similarly, and already it has been alluded to, when you seek to serve people in the political context, in the circumstance that constitutes our context here in Barbados, you can't just do it outside of yourself, relying on that which the system provides for you to use to help people. No, you got to make the sacrifice. Often pull your own pockets. You got to find time which is not there because there are only 24 hours on the clock. And when you're called at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're sick with flu, on your bed of fever, and there's an emergency in the constituency and people's homes are threatened by flood and water damage and people's lives are threatened, it's a serious situation, and the call comes at 2 o'clock in the morning, then you've got to go. But when that lady comes through the door of the pharmacy and she needs this medication desperately, but she does not have the money, what do? It's not business as usual. Hey, you have what she needs. Hey, your heart embraces her. Hey, your hands have driven a move to help her, even at the expense of self. And when that is done and replicated many times in the context of Christchurch West Central, as it was, as I understand, through Joe Edgell, then you are talking about the kind of legacy that really makes a difference to the lives of people. And I understand that to be the kind of representation that Joe Edgell gave. We underestimate in Barbados the value of sports. I still think we underestimate, some of us, the value of culture and what that can mean to not only our development, but what that can mean to the whole business of what it is to be Barbados, the whole idea of Barbados. And Joe, as was said by the leader of the House, given much of his energy and attention to sports and developing of sports groups, Pride of Gall Hill, football, cultural involvement in activities that will lend a kind of sense of wholesome development to people who stood in need. I remember clearly one young man who was known nationally in paying tribute to Joe. I think it was when the center recently was open, talk about the fact that it was Joe Edgell that helped to make him and others like him men. And that is testament to the type of service that makes meaningful difference in the lives of people. And the value, the therapeutic value to societies beset by negatives and ills cannot be underestimated. And if an MP finds that this is one of his principal medium for ensuring that that level and quality of development takes place in the lives of individuals and gives himself to that, embraces it personally, then it is something to be saluted, and I salute Joe Edgell for that. Mr. Speaker, you have come to realize by now this is your first term. Yeah, first term. And you have come to realize by now that this parliamentary allocation which they give monthly to help you to represent constituents with your needs is a joke. It is a joke. And may I take this moment, no matter who is offended, to ask kindly that that be by this government properly reconsidered, because it is a joke. It is gone before it comes. And it puts people like Joe Edgell in the position in which he found himself, not that he was unwilling, because the system does not provide the help you need to give to constituents, you have to fall back on your own resources. And then we hear mouths across this land talking about the amount of money that politicians are giving. That's foolishness. And because we use it as a tool to divide us one from another, the situation will be perpetuated, continue to remain. And I appreciate the applause, but say something to the powers that be, because it is a joke. And especially in these days, passing years, a decade of bad economic performance, more than a decade, coming on the heels of COVID, shut down virtually, totally of the tourism. And it is rough out there. And this allocation that parliamentarians receive to help constituents is a joke. It goes nowhere. It goes nowhere. It can be gone in one fell swoop. If that's not your experience, if that's not your experience in St. James, you serve the welfare up there, I suppose. That's my experience in West, and that's the experience in East. I live in East, and I see people at my colleagues' doors. Yeah? And I hear stories of the early knocks in the morning, and you can't say people go away and got nothing. System does not provide you with it adequately, but you have to find it. You have to find it. And not all of us here have friends in high places that we can pick up the telephone and call and ask them to come through for us. You understand that, Mr. Speaker? We need to pull our own pulse. You have to do that. You have to do that. And the honorable member for St. Michael East has to do that. And I have to do that. And when I am not in a position to do it, I have to call my colleague from St. Michael, trouble. The system needs to better provide. System needs to better provide in terms of the allocation. It is insufficient. Genuine representatives will pull their own pockets, and they do. And I would dare to say that if that has not been the case with you, you either have a good few friends in high places carrying high dollars to whom you have easy access, or you are not a genuine representative of the people. But Joe Edgell was. I'll share, as I come to a close, an illustration which I thought twice about sharing, but I'll share it nevertheless because I'm seeking to be positive in the use of it. And some might tend to suggest it reflects that Joe was possessed of an ill temper, a quick temper, or maybe he was, and that is not always such a bad thing, perhaps. I have a reputation of being a bit too cool. Some people have a reputation of being totally uncool. And Joe Edgell might be perceived by reference to this illustration and by some who know him perhaps as being a bit quick-tempered and ill-tempered sometimes, but in a good cause. I remember words which I would not say myself, used by Joe Edgell with reference to the former late Prime Minister and head of the Barbados Labour Party. I remember not only hearing of those words used, I remember witnessing it myself. Those words used directly to the face of the former late Prime Minister by Joe Edgell himself, calling a spade and trying to put him in his place. That is Joe putting the Prime Minister in his place. That doesn't happen now. You fellas are quiet. You fellas, not winner. Not winner. Hello. Not a fella there. If I'm wrong, correct me when you start to speak, Peter. Honorable member of St. Lucie. Not a fella there. But Joe would. And when he wanted, I don't remember the specifics of the project, but I know it was an ongoing matter in Christchurch for a long time. And Joe had been promised housing. And Joe had been promised, and the former late Prime Minister was promising and dilly-dallying and not coming through and all, not performing, so to speak. And Joe was mighty upset, and he expressed it, and you could see it all over his face, you could hear it in his voice. Even in more exaggerated terms than I have witnessed this honorable member here from Christchurch East speak with reference to the same former Honorable Prime Minister in cabinet meetings, letting them know, listen, man, this is the way it is. He. But the rest of you, but Joe as Joe. But what I want to illustrate is this. And I saw this with my own eyes because I was present. Nobody told me about this. And I think the honorable member for St. Michael East was present. And the then honorable member for St. Michael West Central was present, not the current one, the then. And it was after Parliament ended, and we were, honorable member of St. James, we were in the Parliament yard a night. And I saw Joe Edgell ready to go to blows on a former honorable member, literally go to blows, were it not for the presence of this honorable gentleman to my left and the former honorable gentleman for St. Michael West. Joe Edgell that night would have put some blows on that. I will not identify by name or description that other MP. But you can corroborate or otherwise. I saw that, and I mean it literally. And Joe was going to put some blows on the man in the Parliament yard, and we had to get between and stop. And I could only imagine the front pages of the newspaper, and I had to try to help to stop Joe. I can see the newspapers now, and the party in trouble, and the Parliament in trouble. Vagabonds, you all are. I could see it. Well, we got the fires quenched. We got the fires quenched that night. But Joe was still steaming. You know why? Because this honorable former member was playing the fool with the interests of the people of Christchurch West Central, and Joe was tired talking about it, not having any more of it. It was no time for blows. Some people would think, and I'm not exaggerating, he's here, and honorable members could think that that is a reflection of an ill temper. No, I saw that night as a passionate concern for the interests of the people in Christchurch West Central, and the desire to move any obstacle out of the way of seeing those people's interests served and their needs met. You know, representation for far too many politicians is about it's about the change in my own circumstances. For far too few, it is about the change in the circumstances of others. And I think with reference to Joe Edgell, it was primarily about the change, positive change in the circumstances of others. And I salute him for his service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce my perspective on Joe as a follow-on to what the honorable member who just sat, leader of the opposition, said. I was a bit reluctant to really go this far because based on convention, it is not the normal thing to do. Sometimes speak the truth about the deceased, because everybody wants to say he was the greatest man, he had great relationships within the institution. But if I had to construct a figurative epithet of Joe, I will make sure the narrative is much wider, and certainly not that kind of mundane, almost repetitive approach to describing persons when they're deceased. The honorable member for St. Thomas started off by saying, in fact, during her presentation, she said Joe was a working class man. She said he was committed. She said how loyal he was to the institution. The institution was not as loyal to Joe as Joe was to the institution. And it is always a very harsh thing to say, but it's the truth. And I believe that Joe, wherever he is at present, among the ancestors, Joe will be expecting people to speak the truth about who he is, who he was. And I want to be able to do that without indicting anybody for any major wrongdoing. But the truth, I can't speak about him unless I try to keep within the perimeters of truth. Joe Edgell appeared very much, as indicated by many speakers, to be a very passive and a very conservative individual, especially in the House of Assembly. I don't believe that he did not speak because he could not. Because the measurement in this country of an intelligent man is when he goes to Harrison College. And the Harrison College man cannot be seen as a man without ability. But I think that Joe recognized that he was never part of the inner core of the parliamentary team. He was never even given the opportunity to serve for a moment. Probably it's a Joe thing. For one moment, to serve in a ministerial capacity. Joe Edgell, I think he served as chairman or deputy chairman of the sanitation, and he had a short period at the sports council. He served as deputy speaker of the House on occasions, and most of the time he didn't occupy the chair. And I believe that sometimes these opportunities to serve in the mainstream was a mirror more so of how they felt at the specific time about Joe Edgell. So Joe was actually marginalized. What you saw in the Christchurch area, Christchurch, West Central area, with Joe in constant conflict on the Aberdeen Jones Centre. Joe was passionate and fully enthused about the construction of this Aberdeen Jones Centre, and he kept talking to me. And at the time, Minister Hamilton Lashley, about the center. But at the end of the day, he did not get one job. A center constructed in his constituency, he did not get one job in the center. And he was upset. I saw that. He fought hard. He fought hard for the reconstruction of the resource center. I think that was in Silver Hill, God Hill. And I went on a tour with him when I became minister. It had no water. It had no electricity. I went and I dug up the mole underneath the basement, and I saw the water line. And I got a fella from in the community to reconnect the water line and run water back in the center. Because I have no time for long, drawn-out bureaucratic practices while the young people in the community could not use the center. Probably that's a weakness or level of ignorance in me, but I felt that Joe had to see somebody responding to him across that area. I can also tell you, the honorable member, leader of the opposition, spoke about conflict. Joe never spoke sometimes. In fact, he did not speak that much in Parliament on issues. But as soon, because I felt that he respected the speaker, he recognized where he was, and he would sit quietly. But as soon as Joe found himself outside the halls of Parliament, he would express himself, not demonstrating that he is any academic at all, but the passion which he had. It was physical confrontation and flowery language, of course. colorful language. And on occasions, the honorable member of the opposition talked about 2 cases, but I can tell you, I was present in the yard in the evening, and he felt so angry about the manner in which he was treated that he opened the back door of his car, backed his jacket, threw it in the back seat, and walked across to the western side of the Parliament. And he got a grabble the tie at the MP. And he said, you think you dealing with an F word? I am not sweet. You cannot unfair me. I beat a man at the airport. I will beat you too. And the individual took off the jacket, and I had to go in, small as I am. I refereed the entire battle, and I was able to get both of them settled down. Man, Joe was breathing heavily out there, but I tried to stop it because we were close to the rails on the southern side of Parliament. And I felt that we didn't want the public to see that. And that is another case in addition to what you said. But it shows you the kind of what the member for St. Thomas described as commitment to an institution. And I asked myself, because why these things must happen on all occasions to a special social type of persons who, after the communities recognize the positive aspects of their attributes and believe that these people are best fit to represent their interests in Parliament, then when you get to Parliament, you're Sangridge, but you're Cabral. Sorry, I hope I mispronounced the word. Sorry, because I don't know if it's parliamentary. So. But that special chosen group who never thought that Joe was ministerial material kept Joe on the periphery, totally marginalized him from activities. No, you don't trust me. This is not something that you like to talk about, but why should we have records in history? That's a misrepresentation of a man who I believe was a great and super intelligent individual. Because after parliamentary sessions and you sat down and talked to Joe, apart from his commitment, if you hear how Joe would explain in detail how he thinks a project should go, how it should be structured, especially talking about the pride of God Hill. Joe, up to the 11th hour of his life, enjoyed talking about the pride of God Hill and what he wanted to do for the entire community. But although he was at the sports council, he could not get many things done because other people did not see him as meaningful enough to the institution. If the chances of victory before the polls were marginal, then he would have been important if you can tie off the seat for the party. But as long as the party felt comfortable, everybody ignored Joe. So Joe found himself on many occasions very close to me as a friend, because he felt that in some cases that I was fully aware of what was happening to him. I want to say a little more about that. So Joe kept close to me, and he kept close to Minister Lashley, and he was not a man who was in search of friends or inclusion. But he never had the kind of autonomy as a parliamentary representative within his own constituency. Everybody knew what the constituency that he represented ought to have and what it should not have. And Joe could not function in the way he wanted to. But he was carrying all the blame. So at the 11th hour of his political career, even before he got slow and I'm assuming was ill, many things he put on the agenda for the general development of the people. Because his interest first was not because he was a great pharmacist, no. His interest was in improving the quality of life in that community. He was thinking about how can I develop an infrastructure that will allow me to etch my name in that history of that constituency. That when I leave Parliament, people would have seen a reflection of change in the community itself. And he was not able to do that. So that's probably what others wanted to say, but everybody when addressing the whole thing. So you can't go to his constituency of a man with that kind of intellect, with a man with that kind of commitment, with a man who was willing to work hard. The records that most people spoke about was his personal contributions, not contributions because he was so institutionalized that the institution delivered. The contribution was Joe's personal contributions to human development. So you go to Joe, if you're sick, he drew on his pharmacy, the resources of his pharmacy, out of his pocket. Nobody went into the area and construct things and then give Joe Edgell the credit for constructing or getting things done. Because even when something was built in the area, the employees, and you can go back and check them, came from a different area altogether. And it's that kind of intrigue that was damaging to him. So when you saw Joe in Parliament not speaking, he was unable to restrain himself. Because if he had at any time stand on his feet and to speak the truth, he would have ended up with everybody in Parliament, probably with the exception of the opposition, becoming his enemy. So Joe walked out, and when he got on the top of the stage, I saw it on more than one occasion. Anybody else in here that talking and say they never see it? Telling lies. Straight talk. Telling lies. I saw it on more than one occasion. Joe stepped down the stairs. Prime Minister Owen Arthur, representative of St. Philip, South then, representative of St. Michael. I saw Joe on more than one occasion said, look, you see me? I can't get through to you in Parliament. Come out here. Right? Probably it's an unorthodox way of doing things, but that is the way how conditions force him to be. I believe that experience which he had should be a lesson, especially to working class parliamentarians. One, study it well. I saw one in here. He hasn't deceased, but I saw him being pulled down for an ackee tree for $11,000. I wish he had no money out of it. I've seen others in here, and I'm saying that Joe's life, for those who speak the truth, Joe's life should be a lesson that if we are to build an institution of harmony and respect for each other, then no man or woman should be treated as unequal in this environment at any time. And we need to resolve it. I think that is Joe's contribution. It is like George Floyd. The world understood the behavior of the police force wherever it occurred as a result of what happened to George Floyd. And as long as you tell Parliament, tell the world at large the role that Joe played, and explain and don't let him leave this earth being seen as a man ineffective, incapable of speaking, never execute a program, unfortunately never given ministerial status. In other words, if Joe went to Oxford, the institution was not prepared to acknowledge that he had to pass some exams, that he should be able to read and write, and that he should be able to do some level analysis. He might not do it because of how they treated him, but he critiqued and understood. He understood very well. And I would like to see if we are to redeem ourselves, some interest should be paid to the grave of Joe Edgell. If we learn anything from the experience of him in Parliament, some interest should be paid to what we do at the grave site, with an arrangement between Parliament and family. And I would love to see a headstone on the grave, even if it's financed pooled by individuals, parliamentarians, on Joe's grave. This is all that we can do. And at least once in a while, a visit, and I will urge the parliamentary representative to make sure that every year on the day of Joe's burial, that you visit his grave and pay respect to the contribution of a great man who wanted to do more, but was not given the opportunity to do as much as he did. And people brought his political career to a halt even before he deceased. And those are the realities that we have to face. Stop with this caroling, poetic pictures that we are painting, when we know we did not behave in the way that we ought to have behaved towards the man at this specific time. I saw him cry, man. I saw him cry. I don't want to talk about that story. I saw him cry because he wanted things done and could not get it done. And then when he returned to the constituency, he had to face the pressures. I was at the gas station that is Graham Hall. And I heard young men blaming him for doing things that I knew that he wanted to do, but just could not get it done. And if we take these things as special, we call it the morality, if you can extract the morality of the man's life experience and use that morality as a maxim for guidance, how we can improve an institution and not to leave the institution as we found it. Because in this same parliament and outside in Barbados, men steal big money. And the whole of the society trying to argue if it's a gift. People talking about bribery and treachery and extortion. I said, politicians take gifts. What gift what? Huh? You want to take money for something in return that is far more valuable than the so-called gift. Because you know what gift that is. But you want to protect that level in the society. But then you have a man who wants to do something great, begging for opportunity to do something great, the people given an opportunity to do something great, and then you come here, and if you don't be part of the inner circle, everybody treats you like a pariah. And when you speak like this, they hate you. But whoever hates me, I'm sorry, because I am going to be me until I die. Because I think that is what Joe was. Joe understood what his purpose was. He felt that people would not allow him to do what he wanted to do, and therefore you got the kind of reaction. He wasn't born. He was not born with these special antagonistic qualities. But if you live in an environment that is hostile towards you and don't believe that you are worthy of being seen as a positive entity in the society, then you have to react to suit the people, the demons that are around you. But for me, Joe Edgell was one of the most humane to serve in Parliament for 10 years. He spent about 10 years. He spent 2 terms, 14 years, and was able to sustain himself. And it took a while before he started the popularity in the community begin to wane. But he kept that momentum going because of his personal contribution in the not only in the House Assembly but to the people of Christchurch West Central. Sir, I find myself having to talk like this very often. So I understand why Joe behaved like that very often. Treat people as human beings. Treat them. You don't have to treat somebody that don't treat you good. But treat people good that treat you good. Simple. You go read 10 textbooks, there's one line. Treat people good that treat you good. I personally believe that if that man did not have to endure all that he endured, probably today he might be very much alive. But it was pressure for the 14 years. And then judged by people who did not know what were the dynamics on the inside. But for me, this man tried to contribute to everything that a parliamentarian could contribute to. Don't believe that his politics divorced him from concerns about health. Because Joe was concerned, he would sit down at the lunch table on the membership room and he would talk about diabetes, hypertension, all different forms of diseases that affect his own people. Well, I don't talk about other people's business. Other people talk about their business, and I have no problem with them talking about their business. He talked about our business. And Joe would tell me, man, he don't know why so many black people in Barbados suffering with diabetes. Right? And he would tell me what you should eat, what you should not eat. And the honorable member for Christchurch would tell you, we have had good classes behind the counter on how we can improve our health, whether we should have vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin D. And so we had those conversations with Joe. And the honorable member who now replaced Joe, he also been shaped by that model. But he's not as effective and as efficient or even efficacious as Joe was in this regard. But Joe was serious. Joe was concerned about if there was excessive mosquitoes in Christchurch or what type of mosquitoes there were and what is happening all around him. He talked about all these things that anybody else. He talked about sports. And although he was the way that he was, he loved sports. And rightfully said, the pride of God Hill was his baby. The pride of God. And I was there when the honorable member for Christchurch West Central now, when we had the service at the opening of the park. And I heard I think he's the manager of the Pride, Air Sealy, a remarkable Barbadian footballer. He was there and he spoke about Joe with passion. He actually had tears when he was talking about Joe. Unfortunately, Joe could not even understand. Joe was there, he clapped when others clapped. I sat side of him, and Joe could not understand. And you know how pathetic it is to know a man that you sat side to side with him in the House Assembly, and then you happen now to see this man probably at the last official ceremony that he attended that's Gall Hill, at Gall Hill. I still feel that we should do more and more for Joe. I believe that we don't do enough. Look, I have heard people come into this House Assembly and talk about this body's father, this body's mother, but I know the level of the contributions by certain people when certain people deceased that they feel that should be immortal. They got people that talk about certain people that they believe that they're special human beings and they should be immortal. And when you hear them talk about it, you feel that they curse God, that God should not cause his body to die. It don't be the same speeches when they're talking about Minister King or Prescott. Some believe he should have died ever since. Sir, I don't let it involve you, sir, but you're a Rastafarian. Some of you ain't even come with the fruit of home to sign the book. But you just bury Joe. You could go and get money from the welfare if necessary and bury Joe. Call the body and feel that Joe deserves anything. And we must at least set a new trend. We must at least set, all I am saying to this institution over and over again, we are not here to leave things as it was when we took over government. We have to have a new humanism. There is a necessity to have a new humanism. And whenever external social facts try to push us off track, we must have principles that we must hold on to. Because we are only 29, 30 in here, but there are all kinds of forces in this country, all kinds of forces in this country that want to make a government believe that there are the natural selection from the divine, and they must tell you what to do, and they must say who must be respected and honored. It is what is happening in this country. We have to stand firm. We have to stand firm so that when this government comes to an end in the next election, that you have a record that you can go back on. Not to tell me you patch roads, because the civil servants could do that without you. But principles and setting a new model. And I said to you all already that I think that is what hurt Joe. Because how could you sandwich him? How could you sandwich him? I told you nothing made Barbadians prouder than having to face the battle for independence in 1966. That is on record, etched deep in history, and cannot be erased. When Grant Yellen did what he had to do, etched in history, 1951, cannot be erased. Joe's life, as we reflect, because it means nothing if we wait X amount of months and allow it to elapse to begin to pay tribute. And then when we pay tribute, all that we do is to sing a hymn, man-made by the party, that he was a great man. He is greater than that great, because he is an example to all of us. I heard the honorable member for St. Thomas par excellence. He's all of that. And I want these things to have meaning. Words got meaning. You don't talk words because you're talking meaningless poetry. Words must carry meaning. I want you all to respect him. I want you all to respect it and show it. Not put on a dress or pair new shoes and a suit and go up to the funeral and some event. Some event. So we can do it now. And when we come out of this, we make a commitment that when people serve as long as he did, if you might not want to do it to a person who served 2 days, but you can't tell me a man served 14 years, elected by the people to serve a specific institution, and that institution cannot recognize his worth. It is not right. It is not right. We have to do something different. If, sir, what I said fall on deaf ears, it is not my fault. I am telling you how I feel about it. And I'm telling you I feel that way because I am a grassroots man, and I strongly believe that I have faced victimization more than once. So nobody can victimize me now. I understand it. I don't expect any favors. But I saw him cry. I saw him trying to beat prime ministers, beat ministers, everything. All that he wanted to understand me. I am equally as important in this House Assembly as you. You want to see I won one. That's what the lesson is, you know. You want to see I won one. I don't want to know if I handsome or if I got lots. That is nothing to my credit. If my mouth big or anything, I don't want to know those things. Well, I know it already. I got a mirror. Joe don't want to know that. Even if there's a way in which we can connect with the spirits, you don't even want to hear that. Joe wants us to know that all of us recognize his contribution. That which he wanted to do and that which he was not allowed to do. And those concepts and the commitment that he gave to the people of Christchurch West Central. And I want to say I deeply regret that this man could not live to eternity. He's that important to me because I almost every lunchtime, the leader here of the opposition, and to some extent, my friend, Minister of Small Business, we journey up to Christchurch to pay him a casual visit from time to time. So from time to time, and we know the importance of his contribution to our personal development and our personal longevity as much as we know the contributions that he has made as an individual to the body politics of Barbados and to the development of this institution. Sir, I thank you, and I hope with those brief comments you're quite satisfied with what I've said.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise on this occasion to share a few thoughts about the man Joe Edgell. I grew up in Christchurch West Central, and Joe Edgell lived in my constituency of St. James South. The life of politics is a life of service, and Joe Edgell's life breathed and exampled service at every turn. As a child, he was well known. You always heard about Edgell's Pharmacy. You always heard people speaking about the man Joe Edgell and what he meant to the people who lived around. As has been shared by my colleagues, Joe was a man who was very genial, affable. I always admired his tall and elegant bearing. But he was a man that was consumed with what was best for people. And it's the quality of that type of politician that needs to be held up in this country. For too long, Mr. Speaker, politicians have been vilified. The moment you become a politician, you're told that you are automatically a liar and a thief. Citizens hustle past wonderful examples of political life in the lives of people like Joe Edgell and rush off to the sensational. And they seek to paint us all with the same brush. And this is unfortunate, because if it is one thing young people of this nation must be able to do, is to look to the leaders who stand in front of them, whether they're members of parliament, ministers of government, teachers, whatever position they hold, they must be able to see people of sincerity, people of ability, people of compassion, people of principle. And Joe Edgell was all of that. And so as I listened to the personal stories of my colleagues sharing their personal experiences with the man Joe Edgell, as I listened, I said to myself that these stories should be captured and distributed. Our children in our schools should constantly have before them these wonderful examples of people who serve, who think about community first, people who give of themselves at every turn. Like all politicians, and we all know it well, we're not universally loved. There are people who love us, and then there are people just simply because you are Barbados Labour Party, or simply because you are a politician, you've got to be a bad person. They ain't interested in nothing else. They don't want to know who you are. But what Joe Edgell was able to do was to show to the people of Christchurch West Central who he was, his heart, his mind. And they bonded with him because he bonded first with them and showed it at every single turn. I heard one of my colleagues share something that I too wish to echo. And it is this: it is important that we have mentoring, that you have people like Joe Edgell willing to take under their wing new politicians, helping them to understand what is the cost of a life in politics. We need people like Joe Edgell who demonstrate what it means to serve people, to get on the road and knock on those doors, to respond when the telephone rings, to get up and go and do whatever you can with the little that you have to see what you can do to alleviate the suffering, to alleviate the care and the concerns of people. Because believe me, as you and I know, Mr. Speaker, it is not easy. It's not easy. I remember my first introduction into politics. It was in St. Michael Northeast. I was a constituent in St. Michael Northeast. And as I started looking at the possibility of being involved in politics, I took the opportunity to try to observe what it really was about. So I sought to educate my eyes to see. And when I watched and I looked at what it meant, I said, you have to really love people, love your country, to want to serve under these conditions. It was something else. When I saw things that disturbed me, I would ask, I said, but why? What's this all about? How could you let this go on? You need to stop it. I was told there's some things you can't stop. There's just some things you have to bear. There's just some things you have to tolerate. There's just some abuse that seems to be a normal part of what it is to be a politician. And Joe Edgell knew what that was about. But he bore it. He stuck with the people. He stayed in the interests of the country because that was the quality of the man that he was. Unfortunately, the country becomes titillated by those who stumble, and they become engrossed with those who step out of line, and they get caught up in their fear, and that's how I see it, in their fear that if every one of them is like that, we are in real trouble. That fear causes them to just want to disgrace you, pull you down, misunderstand you. And it's necessary that if we're always going to be able to attract genuine people to politics, people like Joe Edgell, it is necessary that we raise the standard and that we raise the image of politicians and not take the easy, cheap shots that we often take in an effort to win an election without regard for the truth. Because in Barbados, people have come to regard us as political demons and political Santa Clauses, all in one. And we're treated from out of that lens. But if we look at Joe's life, we can see that he was no political demon, but rather a shepherd, a pastor, a carer, a community man. When we look at Joe Edgell, we don't see a political Santa Claus. He wasn't able to pull everything out of a hat. But whatever little he had, he gave. So you felt the spirit of generosity and compassion and concern, even if the resources could not meet every single request that was put to him. And this would have had an effect on his business. This would have had an effect on his family, and it would have had an effect on his health. And so today we honor him for that, for his willingness to put all on the line to make a difference in people's lives. I feel honored that he lived in my constituency, because St. James South seems to be the nesting place for many politicians. We have so many who live in St. James South. From Owen Arthur, former Prime Minister, Joe Edgell, George Payne, Leroy Sisnet, Maxine McLean, you name them. And then they were served by a pantheon of champions. You're talking about people like Lionel Craig. You're talking about Liz Thompson. You're talking about people like Keith Simmons. People who understood what a life of service, what a life of sacrifice is about. That is not about self. It's not about ego. It's not about position. It's not about grabbing at riches. As I walk this road, for me, people like Joe Edgell are the people I watch, that I seek to learn from. Having the honor to serve St. James South, I want to be able to bring to them what Joe Edgell brought to Christchurch West Central, that people feel cared for, their lives changed and empowered, their opportunities widened, their environment well managed, and that they come to live in that constituency and are able to experience the prospects of living a wonderful and prosperous life because they have a good government and they have a good representative. Now, Joe could not have achieved what he did without his family. And so this occasion is also an occasion for honoring his wife. Families are often the forgotten people in the background who are giving up, who are sacrificing, who are doing without, who have to put second and third their needs because the constituents' needs have to come first. They're the ones that perhaps when they first joined themselves to us did not anticipate that a time would come when they would find themselves in the political arena. But they follow us. They support us. They give up their dream of what their family life was to be about to allow us to pursue this life of service. And so the sacrifices that Joe made every day were the sacrifices that his wife made and his family made as he walked this road. And they supported him. They supported him. They loved and cared for him. They stuck with him through thick and thin. And so we honor his wife and his family today for the sacrifice and service which they gave. We want to thank you for the gift of Joe. We want to thank you for your patience and care of him, that he left this life fulfilled, knowing that he was able to serve a people, to make a difference in their lives. As much as he wanted to do more, he still did a lot with a little. And they will continue to bless him and bless the memory of his name for many years to come. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Speaker, I want to, first of all, let me acknowledge the family, and I say my extended family, the family of the late Joseph Joe Edgell, for being here with us as we pay a tribute and homage to what I call, or who I call, a great man. And secondly, I want to ditto every single thing that was said previously by every single speaker as it relates to Joe Edgell and how he would have contributed to the political and social landscape of this country. While constructing my speech last night, I happened to revisit a quote that Joe gave me when he first met me while I was canvassing the constituency. And it is one by the great American poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I quote, "You can never do a kindness too soon, for you never know how soon it will be too late." And when I asked Joe, "But Joe, what do you mean by that?" He said, "There is no appropriate time to do a kindness. There's no right time to do a kindness. A kindness can be done anytime." And I want to say today that this kindness that we are paying to Joe has come at the appropriate time. And it has come at a time when I know Joe himself would want to tell the young men in the constituency of Christchurch West Central, who for the wrong reasons are doing the wrong things at the wrong time. And I know Joe would, even if he's there in his spirit world, would like to tell these young men, it is now the right time to do the right things. Because that is the mantra of the man, Joe Edgell. Recognizing that the young people is basically the future of the country. Recognizing, of course, that the young people are the active players in the development of any country. Joe's emphasis on development of young people went beyond these August chambers. It went beyond the pharmacy as we know it, Joe's pharmacy. It was on and in the arteries of the constituency of Christchurch West Central. It was in the houses that he knocked at. It was on the streets that he walked. It was on the blocks that he traversed. Joe was able to leave an imprint across the constituency like no representative of his time. And it's not, as I heard the Member of Parliament of Christchurch East alluded to, it was not only Christchurch West Central that benefited from this level of altruism and activism. It was the entire Christchurch. And many a politician, and you heard the Member of Parliament for Christchurch West spoke about it, the Member of Parliament of Christchurch East at the time Regional Authority also at times speak about the contribution and the amount of support he got through Joe Edgell. Joe Edgell could have walked in any sphere of Christchurch and solicit votes on behalf of the Barbados Labour Party candidate. That was the ability, the respect, and the tribute paid to the man in every single household. Joe Edgell. He was the quintessence of selflessness, simply put. And I happened to be associated with him just after I left school. And he told me, young man, you're doing A-level chemistry, biology, physics. And there is a need in Barbados for pharmacists. I want you to go and do the pharmacy course. I said I would look at it and see, because at that time, a young, impressionable man, I was not set in my mind as to what area I would pursue. But taking his advice, I went and joined the pharmacy course. A couple of years after I graduated, he said, young man, I want you to come and get involved in politics because you will carry on the baton when I leave politics. And so said, so done. The man was a clairvoyant of sorts. Because look, here it is now, I represent the same constituency that he would have represented for 14 or so years with the highest quality of representation. And whether it is football that he believed in, because Joe didn't only see football as a sport that the youngsters in God, the talented youngsters, I must say, who live in the epicenter of Christchurch, and that was Joe's word. He believed that Christchurch West Central was the epicenter. It was the beacon of Christchurch, Christchurch West Central. And oftentimes you will hear, and I want to pay homage with the collective voices of those people in Sergeant's Village, in Maxville, in Warners, in Vauxhall, in God Hill, Silver Hill, Kendall Hill, Church Village, Montrose. And if I miss out any, please forgive me. Because Joe believed that every single part of that biosphere called Christchurch West Central belonged to him. And he would do everything in his power to ensure that he respond to their needs. A simple man with a simple message, with a simple determination, and that was to improve the lives of the ordinary folk and move them from one stage to the next. And he saw sports not only for the limelight and the profitability, but he saw sports as a social development tool. And oftentimes you get young men with, they are impressionable and they have a lot of excess energies. We know if they are misdirected what happens. And Joe said, let us form a football team that can bring gel the community together and glue in such a way that that is able to represent the entire Christchurch. And that is what Pride of God Hill did. And when you heard about football being played at the National Stadium, not only Christchurch, but Central and the people that associate themselves with God Hill ventured to the matches. The entire Christchurch came out in support of Pride of God Hill. And Joe was so in tune with the whole notion of a Pride of God Hill, because it was sponsored by Bear at the time. But while doing some locums at the pharmacy, because I worked for Joe as well as a young pharmacist, I remember a day I went into one of the cupboards and what I saw was almost every single drug from Bear Pharmaceuticals too. That was the connection he had to Bear. He had all the drugs from Bear Pharmaceuticals, Caniston and the Aleve and all the others, because he believed he was so connected to the whole notion of a God Hill team, that every single thing associated with God Hill. At one time, the color of God Hill was red. That red too. At one time, the color of God Hill was red. Because Joe understands the vibrancy of a color, not only politically, because I wouldn't have to speak limpidly about his association and his desire at all times to represent the Barbados Labour Party. He was an unequivocal soldier and a foot soldier of the Barbados Labour Party, without a doubt, without question. That was the man, Joe Edgell. But using sports as a social developmental tool is not myopic by any stretch of imagination. It's only because you hear about the mechanics and the science involved in sports and the level that is played at on the international sphere, but at the level of communities. If you understand as a social practitioner in the member parliament for St. Michael East can help me in this regard. As a social practitioner, if you understand the dynamics and the importance of sports in terms of changing people's lives. I remember it was just before we had the final, where God Hill HT, we had the final against Wales. And Joe gave a speech. Because I must say today that Joe became the president of the God Hill football team in 1985 until death. Never once challenged. Never once challenged because of the uninhibited respect he had in God Hill amongst the players. And Joe gave a speech. And all Joe said to the players back then, Sion, I think it was there, Sion, Braffett, the Silly brothers, Air and Terry. And you heard Air Silly elucidate about the quality of man, the human being known as Joe Edgell, when it opened. And I had an epiphany to open that park one night for Joe Edgell. It came to me in a dream. It was like the Bajan dream, or the Christchurch West Central dream, to open that park. And I moved it with alacrity, with the help, of course, of the member parliament of St. Michael East at the time, to have that park ready for the opening. And then Silly spoke about Joe with tears in his eyes. Those tears were the collective tears of every single person in Christchurch West Central. The collective tears when he spoke about his ability to be transformed after meeting Joe Edgell. And the fact that Joe Edgell took care of him in a way that represented a father taking care of a child. His own child. Not a bastardized one. His own child. And the name father and uncle oftentimes associated itself with Joe. And when Joe addressed those youngsters, those young footballers, he said, I want to tell you one thing before you go on the field. And I want this to stay with you for the rest of your lives. God Hill is a team. not only a team of 11 or 12 players. You may get some subs, so maybe 16. Remember, part of James Central played a little football, you know better than me. But irrespective of the number, he said, you may be 16 players here, but you have a team of about 20,000 people in Christchurch by Central alone, and about 60,000 if you look at the whole geographical space of Christchurch. But the most important thing here is the acronym TEAM. Joe said, team means for him, and it should mean for every single player, together, everyone achieves more. That's what team means for Joe Edgewood. And he impart that acronym to the entire team. And you know what happened? They won't have to tell you that God will win. But in those days, God will win most of the games anyhow, most of the championships. But that was the manner of man, Joe Edgewood. He understands social dynamics. He understands the philosophical line in the sand as it relates to doing the right thing and being the right representative, imparting the right advice on those youngsters at the right time. As I said before, there is no right time to do the right thing. That is the bottom line. And that is what epitomizes Joe's ability to transform the lives of the people in Christchurch West Central. And so, on the heels of 2 gunshot incidents like yesterday, if I am earshot of those youngsters, I will want to repeat what Joe told me as a young man coming up. And I'm sure he would have told a lot of youngsters he was the representative. There is a wrong time to do the wrong thing. And that time is now. This is not the time to take up the weapons of destruction. That's what he would tell them. Instead, take up the tools of empowerment. If you are good at football, get involved in the sporting discipline. It's called a sporting discipline because that's what it teaches you. Discipline, hard work, selflessness, togetherness, the ability to care for one another. These are the things. Then he would have a conversation about conflict resolution. And these are the alternatives. So I am saying, let us pay a tribute, a homage on behalf of Joel by doing the right things. I'm speaking to all those young men out there who are taking up guns as I speak to resolve issues, mundane issues, must I say. That is not the Joe Edgewood way. I am sure today he's rolling in his grave based on what he's saying in the constituency as I speak. This same young man, that he will be associated with their fathers. And I'm sure that the likes of Cedric Nichols and, as I said before, Sion and Roger Yaya Calendar and all those young men could speak lucidly of the contribution Joe made to their lives and how he would have made that paradigm so that there could be put on the right path. That is the respect Joe Edgewood had. And I must say that after I graduated, I spent some time at the Maxwell Pharmacy, where Joe had an office with Strathclyde office. And I must tell you, it goes back to what he told me in that quote. You can never do a kindness too soon. I spent a long time at the pharmacy, I must tell you. And every single day, and this, I know the member of parliament for St. Michael East talk about lies. But I will not revert to the book of John 8 verses 44, because the devil is a liar. But this is the unrestricted truth. When I say that every single day, I give away most of Joe Edge's pharmacy. I give away the entire pharmacy to all the people in Christchurch. No, I said it was in the Maxwell area. Maxwell. I ain't talking about Christchurch, West Central. I sat down as a pharmacist. And I gave away his entire pharmacy. Because every single time some person comes with a prescription, and sometimes Joe will be at Parliament or wherever it was, and I call him or I text him or whatever, he would say, just give the person. You know them ain't got no money. Okay? We're here to serve. And there's a social aspect to pharmacy. Just get them. Many times I went home without a cent in my pocket because I would usually have to pay myself at the end of the day. We made no money, being honest with you. I don't know another individual in a shot, probably in earshot, that would do the same thing. Be honest truth. I give way, and I hope I cannot be brought any charge. You're a lawyer. The entire pharmacy. The time I got a privilege to say that. I give way. But that was the type of person Joe was. If you came to the pharmacy and you had no money for medication, that which would save your life or your child's life, Joe would never let you leave there unless he provided a remedy for your problem. And he really redefined the whole notion of practicing pharmacy as far as I was concerned, and as far as a lot of persons perceive. Because oftentimes you hear about pharmacists being pill counters. They put pills and medication in containers and they give it to patients. Not Joe Edgel. When I worked with Joe in 1998, Joe told me, young man, youngster, he used to call me youngster or young boy, you can do all the prescriptions and put out the medication. I can counsel the patient. And sometimes I got 10 prescriptions done and he's still at the first patient counseling. Joe really and truly brought a new meaning to counseling patients when doing their prescriptions and giving them their medication. Joe would spend hours talking to the elderly, the young people. Minister Abrams alluded to the fact that he provided certain prophylaxis. I don't know. Joe would spend hours talking to one person just so that he can make them understand the importance of doing the right thing again when it comes to their medication. That was the manner of man in Joe Edgel. And he insisted that before a person leave the office, that person would know every single thing about their medication, the do's and don'ts, that their family will have the knowledge of it, and that he would have given them the comfort in taking the medication. Because unless you can convince some person that the medication is going to work, because medicine is 50% psychological, it may not. The honest truth. That is a part of the biological makeup of the human body. Joe had the ability to convince, and they say he was involved in fishing. I think he was able to convince a fish to jump out water. The honest truth. That was the ability of the man Joe Edgel when it comes to him prescribing medicine and being able to talk and comfort patients. Joe Edgel. From a developmental perspective, and I must say, Joe had a vision for the transformation of Christchurch West Central. You can look at the roads in Civil Hill, the Keezer Hill Road. You can look at Briar Hall and the development, and you would have heard earlier about the fight to get development for his people. Joe understands the social and domestic problems associated with persons clustered in one environment, densely populated environment, and how it can cause unease and disquiet. He understood it. He understands the peace of mind associated with having your own piece of the land and being able to live a comfortable life in your home. Joe understood it. And that is the genesis for the Barry Hall project, which he fought for with every sinew of his being. There was a development for commercial purposes in Kendall Hill. And Joe went in a frontal way against the Prime Minister at the time so that he can have it for his people. The Member of Parliament of St. Michael East spoke about the physical altercations with other MPs. Joe was willing to do whatever it took. Some persons often refer to him as Smoking Joe. His opponents would know that too. The Smoking Joe. At the end of when the fire is out and the smoke has disappeared, Joe remains standing. And he remains standing as the defender of the people of Christchurch West Central. And I'm happy to be given the baton. And to be given it by Joe himself while he was alive, while he was lucid, while he had the physical wherewithal to pass that philosophical baton to me. And I'm saying, if he's somewhere listening today, that I will try my best and do every single thing that is humanly possible. Well, first said, even if I'm half as good. But to hold on to that baton and to maintain your philosophy of doing the right thing at the right time for the right people. And that is the good people of Christchurch West Central. So in closing, I want to say to you and the entire Barbados that the legacy, the footprint, the physiological appearance of Joe Edgell will never ever die in Christchurch West Central once I have breath in my body. I want to say they play a part is a small token. And I see his picture there smiling at the good people of Christchurch West Central. But I want to say to you today that Joe's legacy will live on not only for me, but for the grateful people of Christchurch West Central. And I want to end off by referring to the last two lines of one of Joe's songs by Frank Sinatra, My Way. And I want to say to you, he faced it all in his political journey. And Joe stood tall, 6 foot some. And when I look at him, sometimes I'm vertically challenged. So he faced it all in his political life. He stood tall physiologically. He stood tall philosophically, figuratively. But most of all, he did it his way. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to fully endorse all the tributes that have been paid to Joe Edgell and to his family. And I want to extend condolences on behalf of my family and the entire parliamentary family, and that ask that the usual courtesies be extended and that the resolution be sent to the family. And would also wish now that we stand in 1 minute silence on behalf of Joe Edgell. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the sitting be suspended until 2:45 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2:45 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:45 p.m.